Is Tahj Washington a deep dynasty stash? We're talking about that in today's video. As always, like and subscribe. We put out content all year long, both redraft and dynasty. And join our Discord. Link is in the description on how to do that. Appreciate it if you guys would join, and we'll help you out with any questions that you may have. Today, we're talking about rookie receiver Tahj Washington, who's been getting a little bit of buzz recently. I was looking at, every now and then I like to look at the community rankings for Dynasty, Keep Trade Cut, Dynasty Daddy, things like that. And something I noticed is that Tahj Washington is one of the top 5 risers over the last 30 days. Now, of course, it's not like he is at a point where he's somewhere significant. He's considered wide receiver 130th in Dynasty, but he has risen. He has risen 45 spots. So I decided to make one of these deep Dynasty stashes. I've made a bunch of these. If you guys want to check those out, you should. Mostly on, 6th, 7th, undrafted guys and their possibility of making a roster and, having an impact on fantasy football. What's their path? So today, like I said, it's Tahj Washington. Just to give you a little bit of overview of Tahj Washington, he played 5 years in college from 2019 to 2023. He started off at Memphis during that 2019 season. Didn't really do much in 2019, and then had a really, really good 2020 season with Memphis. Now, 2020 was the COVID year, so take that with a grain of salt. But he did lead all freshmen in the nation in receiving, I believe. So he had 743 receiving yards, 43 receptions, 6 touchdowns. As a freshman is really, really, really good. And then he went to USC and he was just solid. He was solid for 3 years at USC, and his best year came last year. So as you can see here, he's a little bit of a smaller one, 5'10", 175. So he's definitely in that mold of a small receiver, which is part of the reason why he didn't go until the 7th round of the draft. Look at his 2023 numbers, 60 catches, almost over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. Again, got drafted by the Dolphins, which is always going to boost your fantasy value. If you're on the Dolphins, your fantasy value goes up because we just think, we're always looking at, okay, what player are the Dolphins going to make into a fantasy stud, right? And it's always possible. It's possible for sure. So looking at some of the measurables here, his combine numbers were okay, not great. Like his 40-yard time at 4.52. You'd like to see it more, especially at such a lightweight, a kind of a smaller receiver. His 10-yard split, 1.63, is pretty bad. I don't know how accurate this is because I don't think he ran the 40 at Combine. I think he did it at the Pro Day. So if that's really accurate, that's really, really bad. Like what the 10-yard split is, it's measuring how fast you are within the first 10 yards of your 40-yard dash. And teams are putting more value into it because it kind of shows burst and your burst off the line of scrimmage, right? More players run a 10-yard route or they run 10 yards in a straight line more often than they run 40 yards. So we want to see this number like 1.55. A 10-yard split of 1.55 is like the worst we want to see. Anything go higher than 1.55 is not good, and anything lower is starting to get really good. He's at 1.63. That's really, really bad. And then his vertical, not that great as well. So what we're looking at is a small, unathletic athlete, right? Like in terms of what the Combine is saying, right? Now, does that mean it's a death nail? No, because we see a lot of people just kind of defy the odds, right? They don't have fast 40-yard times. They don't jump out of the gym, right? They don't broad jump across the entire field and things like that, but they just play football well. And that could be Tahj Washington. We see that with guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Keenan Allen. These guys are players that fell in the draft, not because of production or the type of receiver they are, because they're just not very athletic. So it is a bad combination of not only are you undersized, but you're not fast, right? You need to win somewhere. Can you win with speed? Can you win with route running? Can you win with burst off the line of scrimmage? Can you win because you're just bigger and taller and stronger than everyone? You need to win somewhere. And when teams see a 5'10", 175-pound receiver who's also not very fast, that's why you fall in the draft. Looking at his production numbers, though, they're pretty good. His career dominator is 18%. So over the course of his 1 year at Memphis and 3 years at USC, he accounted for 18% of his team's offense. Yeah, his team's passing offense, both yards and touchdowns. It did dip a little. He had a really good freshman year. He was 21% of Memphis's offense as a freshman, a 19-year-old freshman. And then he went to USC and it dipped a little bit at 11 and 15%. And then last year he was at 23%. So, we kind of have a bookend of he started off really strong and he ended really strong. He had a couple down years there, maybe to no fault of his own. You see his best season there at 23%, which was last year. Breakout age of 19, which is the first year in which he put up at least 20% of his team's passing offense, which he accounted for. 19 is good. If you're breaking out at 18 or 19, that's really, really good. Usually that translates to good players, right? Because if you're a young player dominating older players, that usually translates to, as you get older, you just get better and better, right? PFF grade at 85. Here's the thing about Tahj Washington. All the analytical underlying stats kind of point in his favor. The size, the measurables, even the production, it's kind of there, but not quite where we want to see it. But it's not there. But all the measurables kind of point to him being a good player, which is intriguing, right? Which goes back to sometimes players just slip through. Sometimes players are just good at football, whether or not they're fast or strong or big, right? Yards per route run is usually a good metric to measure wide receiver success. 3.06 is really, really good. 3.06. Anything above really 2.5 is starting to be good. And then when you start getting above 3, that's really, really good. Just for reference, guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. had a yards per route run number of 3.18. Malik Neighbors, a crazy 3.64. Roma Dunze, 2.93. Right? Brian Thomas, 2.61. Troy Franklin, 2.93. Xavier Legette, 3.15. So when you start getting above 3, that's a pretty insane number, right? Usually the top receivers in the draft have a pretty high above 3 yards per route run number. So that's good to see. His ADOT at 10.8 is really good. That means he's not just a behind the line of scrimmage dink and dunk guy. He's also not just a field stretcher. He's kind of middle of the field type of player. Drop percentage at only 6.3 is really good. We want to see that number below 7%. So at 6.3 is great. It's good. Yards after catch, 7.3 yards after catch per reception. And when you watch the film, which I'll talk about, you definitely see that from Tahj Washington. You definitely see the yards after catch ability, his ability to, juke people out, break tackles, force missed tackles is really, really good. So, maybe that's where he wins in the NFL. His contested catch percentage is close to almost just under 49%. And that's really good as well, especially if you're going to be playing, which I think he will, kind of more over the middle in the slot. I think that's where he's going to win is kind of in the slot over the middle. And you need to be able to catch in traffic, contested targets. And he's at almost 50%. Anything we want to see this number at least between 40 and 45 at the worst, right? Above 45 is good. Above 50 is starting to get really, really good. Being closer to 50 you are is obviously better. And then contested target percentage. If you've watched these videos before, you've heard me say this over and over and over. What is this stat? Well, this stat is what percentage of your targets were contested. And I'm putting more stock into this. I want to follow this a little bit on how it translates to success in the NFL, fantasy success, or just production in the NFL in general, because I have a feeling that when this number is lower, that means a lot of times that's due to the receiver. You're getting open, you're running good routes, and you're juking out the defenders, the coverage defenders, or the man defenders. You're juking them out to find the holes in the zones so that no one's around you. So you're making catches that aren't contested. Right? Now, of course, some of that plays into the quarterback play. Some of that plays into, what kind of targets are you getting? Are you getting a bunch of behind the line of scrimmage stuff? Well, that number is going to bring it down and things like that. But overall, this is over the course of his entire college career. It's at 15%. this number I think is going to even out to where anything below 20 is starting to get good. Anything at 15 or lower is starting to like, okay, antenna up, right? Antenna up. Why are you open all the time, essentially? Is that because of your route running? Is that because of your ability to find the holes and zones? I think it lends to, this number might potentially lend to showing how good someone is as a route runner, which we don't really have a metric to measure that by besides just watching someone. And then real quick, yards per route run by scheme, both really good. We want to see both of these. Obviously, ideally, we want to see both of these numbers high. We want to see you good at both man and zone. If we had to choose, I want to see you better at zone than man. Why? Because the NFL runs 60 to 65%, 60 to 70% zone coverage at any given time, right? Like no team is running. I think the highest is like 35% or something like that, maybe 40% in a single game. But over the course of a season, it's 60 to 70% of a team is running man coverage. Yeah. And then his zone number at 2.84. So he is better in zone, but he's good at both, which is good to see. And then you see his snap percentage last year. Played 500 snaps in the slot, 34 out wide. So that's why I say he probably projects as a slot receiver. So what is he? What is he for Miami potentially? I think he's kind of this multi-role receiver where he can kind of do it all in the return game. That's something to keep an eye or to pay attention to as well, is a lot of these guys that are being drafted late in the draft potentially are just going to be special teams guys. And that doesn't necessarily help us for fantasy unless your leagues reward that. But he could just be like a punt return, kick return guy, play in the slot every now and then, use him on jet sweeps and kind of a gadget player. And all of that is nice for the Dolphins, but doesn't really translate to fantasy success. Can he get on the field as a slot receiver? Possibly. It's possible, right? Can he get on the field? And Miami's going to find ways to get him open. But, the fact of the matter is, they obviously Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are there. Odell Beckham is going to have a role on this team. They drafted Tahj Washington, who I really like, in the 6th round, I believe, of this year's draft. There's still like Braxton Berrios, River Craycraft, who, they're using those guys consistently. So Tahj Washington kind of has an uphill battle. He's not this supreme athlete or anything like that. He probably doesn't get on the field or doesn't make the team unless he can contribute on special teams. And then from there, we'll have to see. So do I expect anything from him this year? No, I don't. Not for fantasy. If you have deep enough rosters and you want to stash him, I don't mind that, just to see how training camp progresses and is he making a name for himself? Is he carving out a role? Because if he can get to Miami, to me, needs a consistent third option in the receiving game. It can't all just be Tyreek Hill and Waddle, because good teams in the playoffs are going to be able to shut down one or two of those guys. They need a consistent third option, which they just don't have, and they haven't had for the last 2 years. Is that Odell Beckham? Maybe. If he can become kind of that third consistent option, Tahj Washington, that's going to be valuable for fantasy football, in my opinion. So overall, what I like about him on film is just, again, he seems to be a very smart player, always finding the holes in the zone and the open spaces, doesn't drop passes over the middle of the field, which is really, really good. When he gets the ball in his hands, you kind of watch him go. His after the catch ability is just like really, really fun to watch if you watch the film. He does run block. He's a willing run blocker, which again is going to be necessary for teams and things like that. Now, some of his weaknesses is, well, his size. He has tiny hands, which I know is kind of funny to say, but bigger hands does translate to better fantasy success for wide receivers. It just does. And it makes sense, right? Because you're catching the ball with your hands. So can he consistently defeat man coverage in the NFL? We'll see. Obviously, he's not this supreme athlete or anything, but he's just kind of a football player, and I hope that he can carve out a role. Will be something I'll be watching in the training camp offseason. So that's all I have for you guys today. We'll be back with probably one or two more of these before we kind of finish up. Again, like and subscribe to the channel. Catch you guys on the next video.